Welcome to Not Suitable for Work. I'm your host, Peter C. Diamond. You think your office is nuts? Wait until you hear some of these stories.
It's a story I tell people as a cautionary tale of what not to do in a pressure-filled situation.
And there's nothing like making a joke and looking at a room full of people who, are just stone-faced, and they know that you blew it.
What about our professional dynamic has given you license to act in this way?
Here's your colleague that you've worked with for all these years, and do you know anything about him? Anything about him at all?
With each podcast, I interview folks who have a humorous work story to share. Along the way, I'll offer advice to help you make sense of your own office nonsense. Don't worry, no careers were harmed in making Not Suitable for Work. Names and places may have been changed to protect the not so innocent. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Let's say your company's having a tough year. Revenue is down, there have been some layoffs, prospects are dim, and there's a whiff of desperation in the air. And then, like an angel from heaven, a significant opportunity to turn the business around lands at your doorstep. There's just one teeny tiny problem. Claims are being made by the executive ranks that aren't quite true, and you're given a tacit order to manipulate the truth. What lengths would you go to win over a prospective client? This is a dilemma every business professional will face at some point in his or her career. It's not unusual for a company to exaggerate a capability or breadth of experience in order to curry favor with a new client. How far would you go to stretch the truth? And once you start, will you ever be able to draw the line? In this episode, my guest, Patrick Collins, quickly gets caught up in a corporate caper to shade the truth when trying to win over a new client.
I was working in New York as the client service director of a small New York outpost of a British ad agency. At the time that I joined, we were about 80 people. That was just before 2001. So post-2001, lost a lot of .com business, and like a lot of places, contracted. So we had contracted to about 35 people. But we could sustain ourselves at 35 people. However, our office in New York City was probably one of the most spectacular offices I've ever seen. It's probably one of the reasons why we had to contract, because it was so big, a big loft building, elevator doors that opened in directly into the lobby on the 5th floor, and it looked like a movie set for a little hip, cool ad agency. I think it might have been 25,000 square feet. Now, everybody, you had cubicles, you had the main conference room floated above the kitchen. It was on like a second level because that's how high the ceilings were. So it's part of the reason, I fell in love with it when I saw it, and I had moved from LA to New York, and I was like, oh, I got to work here.
Now it sounds like a place I'd want to live. I'm like, who wants to just work there?
I'll just
work there and live there.
Yeah, the guys who had run the agency before the president who had hired me had really spent a ton of money to kit it out. So it was physically really impressive. So they had built up to about 70 people. Half of that went away, so it was 35 people in a 25,000 square foot loft. So everybody
So
had...
you each almost had like 1,000 square feet.
We had a studio apartment.
Yeah.
Everyone had a studio apartment to work in. And slowly but surely trying to build business back, trying to get, we had sort of stabilized and we were just starting to kind of get some traction moving forward. So tons of new business meetings. The story I'm going to tell you pertains to one that was a big global pitch that was being run out of London. And it was for a big pharmaceutical, over-the-counter pharmaceutical company. And they had been looking for a global agency, and the agency in London got into this global pitch. And as part of that, we had, you had to have it was going to be run out of London, but you had to have a presence in New York and in Singapore and blah, blah, blah. So we, of course, were the New York office, and I don't even think we had a whole lot to do with the submission of materials for it. It was all being driven out of London. These things, as you know, take months and months and months and months. So it was sort of, the summer was a lull, but we get a phone call, and it's from the guy who runs the president of the office in London, who says, you're probably going to hear from the global advertising director of this big blue chip pharmaceutical company. She happens to be in New York, and she wants to come by the office and visit. Okay. So I think even then, we had people out on vacation. We might have been 27 people. And I remember at the time asking him, what do we need to do? How do we manage this? It's just a tour. She just wants to see the office. And he sort of, in an offhand way, I remember him saying, and I don't recall exactly what I had put into the submission, but I think I told them we were about 100 people. So the first order of business is we got to make ourselves look bigger. And ultimately, we kind of all sat in a room, we defined a plan. And at the time, it seemed like an ingenious plan. Everybody who had a friend that could put on a decent pair of pants, and a shirt, we had them come in the office, invite them into the office, and we'll put them somewhere, and we'll basically stage direct them.
Yeah.
Like we'll give them
like an art director pen.
It was like a set director. We were dressing the set. That only got us up to about like 40 people.
Oh, wow.
Not even that. Like there were.
No, that's true.
Because people had jobs.
Yeah.
And we didn't know when she was coming.
There aren't more out of work actors, actresses.
Well, we got second best. At the time, we knew somebody who taught in one of the ad schools, and I forget the name of it, but it was an ad school that we donated some free space to, and they would meet every Thursday night. So we contacted the woman who runs this ad school to invite every one of her students and or their friends to show up at the agency. So I think ultimately, in the end, we were able to get about 65 people,
right, so
of which 40 were, we didn't know.
Fill-ins.
Yeah.
Extras.
All the guys in the studio, they were all brought out, told to wear a shirt or a tie and dress like their account people or creative people. But then so we had this, we got all these people, but where do they sit? What do they do? So we realized, well, we've got to have more workstations. We only had, 30 workstations set up. So we had a bunch of old computer equipment, monitors, CPUs, keyboards. And I remember somebody had the idea of, we will just go around, set monitors up, and we'll put chairs in front of the monitors, because it was kind of like counter style seating. We had chairs in front of the monitors, set monitors up, put keyboards out. We'd open up pads of paper. We opened up Diet Cokes and Cokes. But the monitors didn't plug into anything, and they weren't on. So they were just monitors. There were no CPUs. It was just a desktop monitor sitting there. But we tried to stage dress it so it looked like someone was there but had just walked away.
Yeah, so as long as you don't look too closely.
Yeah,
you get the vibe, you get the sense, you get the vibe.
We had basically you put a lot of trash in. You just put a lot of personal effects all around the office. We tried to make it look like we had 70 people, and we had about 60 kids, and I think the average age was probably 19 or 21 at the most. And they come in, and we literally you go over there, sit over there, you guys talk in a group, you go into this conference room, mill around. The woman who was a receptionist was this absolutely hilarious German woman, Astrid. And she would get on, they had an intercom, and she'd get on the intercom, she'd be like, Patrick, client call line 2, Patrick, client call, Ed, client call line 3. We don't have lines. We never had lines. And we just there was this whole hubbub of activity, and people were crossing. It was it was like a West Wing episode. And so we're walking this woman around, and that's when I think it hit me.
And are you kind of the...
I'm hosting.
So you're hosting.
Myself and the creative guy.
Okay, so you guys are the kind of the
Meet and
adults
greet,
in the room who are kind of representing
Yep.
this agency. in
Welcome,
New York.
and she just, thank you so much. I just want, well, let's give you a tour. And so we're walking around, and as we're walking around, that's when it dawned on me, like, the monitors aren't plugged in. Like, they're just sitting there because they were old monitors, but they're not even on. So they're just a bunch of empty old monitors sitting on desks. So I noticed, like, all these flaws. And then I noticed, like, okay, the activity level was so insane. It was like nobody was ever seated anywhere. They were always just walking from point A to point B. People were getting called on the intercom. It's like we just like over-egged it. So this woman probably thought, my God, this is the busiest, craziest ad agency I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's like Grand Central Terminal.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here.
But long story short, like, she left. We didn't hear anything immediately. She appreciated the time. And I just remember looking at these two of the folks who worked for me on the biggest piece of business we had at the time. And they just had this look in their face that was like, they were kind of looking at me kind of cocked, like, really? And it was almost like they were a little embarrassed. And I kind of remember thinking, that was kind of embarrassing.
And embarrassing from what perspective? Like,
I think they were a little ashamed that we had to go that far overboard, and that it was so clearly, like, we literally had 19 and 20-year-olds walking around, masquerading as employees. I think my takeaway from it was, like, our emotions were driving us to that point, and that's what you kind of need in new business. It's what you want to work at an agency that rides on emotion. But that you've got to be really careful how far you push the emotion, because these guys were smart, and they were a little embarrassed that we had just had to do that to try to position ourselves to be something that we were not at all. And it really, like, I just remember going home, and that kind of stuck with me. And that really resonated, like, oh, you got to be really careful. Like, it was fun to pull it off, but in the end, we didn't get the business. It didn't fool that person that our office in New York, she probably thought our office in New York had was a bunch of 20-year-olds. But I just remember thinking, like, oh God, emotion is a great thing in advertising, but you can't push it too far and abuse it, because then suddenly you start losing the troops, as opposed to continuing to give them reasons to believe that they can get excited and kind of conquer anything. But I didn't actually learn the lesson, because we turned around and 3 years later we did it again.
so what happens?
We were in an even smaller place. We were on the corner of 17th and 5th. We had moved out of the big office.
Same agency.
Same agency, smaller footprint. I think we were 20 people, and this was tight. This was a narrow kind of railroad car New York City office right off of Fifth Avenue. And lo and behold, again, because of our London ties, we got invited for a global pitch for a big beer brand out of Australia that the guys in London had handled for years and years in Europe. So they got asked, when they were looking at global agencies realignments, to pitch. So we were, of course, in the New York office that had to go to Milwaukee and meet with the guys in Milwaukee. And as long as we actually got fairly deep into the pitch, the work was good, the thinking was good, but we always kept going there. We kept going to Milwaukee. And then the final meeting was going to be at the agency headquarters in New York. And this and they probably, again, thought we were 75 people. For some reason, we never brought that number down to a realistic. It was always
we never
inflated.
Really told anyone,
yeah,
how many people really.
But and in this case, the office was so small, there was no way you could be 75 people. But what we could do is we can imply that we had more floors in the building, and we did decide that at some point, if they're going to come here and they can literally see every desk from the reception area, because it was that small of an office space, well, that's instant. You're going to lose right off the bat. So we concocted this kind of big story about how we had 2 more floors in the building and we were redoing them. And one of the floors was right above us, and we also had the top floor, and that was our media folks, but our media folks had moved into the another partner agency, blah, blah, blah. But the top floor was being redone, and we had access to the top floor.
But it wasn't being redone for you.
No. But if they wanted to see it, we could prove it to them. But every time we corresponded with them, we'd tell them, just come to the 3rd floor. You'll see us on multiple floors. Come to the 3rd floor. That's reception. Remember to come to the 3rd floor, because the other floors weren't ours. But I do remember the night before, like this was probably as low as it got for me personally. The night before in the lobby, I had to unscrew the lobby sign after the security guy had gone, and I had to put in a new lobby listing that had our agency name on 3 floors.
This is what an account person would do to win a new piece of business.
And we thought that was a pretty ingenious touch.
It is.
To show them that we were on 3, 4, and 7. But 3 said, of course, reception. We could go up to reception. And needless to say, we didn't fool them either. So, but again, it was a couple of the people who were at the big office had moved with us to the smaller office, and just the looks, that's, I think, when it really struck me, like, oh, that was kind of embarrassing. Not only is that embarrassing for us to do that, it's embarrassing for them to be part of it. So those are 2 unsuccessful new business capers, but it was all about kind of, I always thought it was, agencies always want to appear bigger, better, newer, hipper, cooler than they probably really are, because that's the only way you're going to get the additional client revenue to grow bigger or better. But on the other hand, you just got to be careful how far you push people and how far you push your team, because you can kind of lose them, and then once you lose them, it's hard to get them back.
And in both cases, it didn't really help you.
No.
So
no, had we probably just been more honest, it might have actually gotten us a little further.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was part of the ethos of this agency is you just acted. They had an apocryphal new business story where they won a huge global assignment, and they only had 10 or 12 employees, and they had to wing it. So it was, we just kind of always thought we could fool people. And in both cases, had we been more honest, we may have gotten knocked out sooner, but ultimately they were going to find out.
Yeah. I mean, there is kind of this lore that can exist with advertising agencies and what you do, and kind of the hubris involved, and clearly didn't work out in those 2 situations. And kind of having worked at a place where I don't think we ever tried to intimate that we had more people. So this agency I worked at in New York, it was never fooling them to say we have more people, although we would say we have, our big thing was we have global offices. We have offices in Athens and Lisbon and Sao Paulo and London. We'd have like 1 or 2 people there. So that's what we would do. That would be, we've got this global footprint, or we would also kind of exaggerate the type of work that we did for our clients. And it's interesting for me, after a while, I couldn't do it anymore, because it just was not, I guess, the Midwestern person in me, it just wasn't ringing true. And I was like, I just don't think this is.
I remember one of my favorite questions, it still sort of is, and I'll explain why, but the president of this agency, if we were ever in a conversation with a client or a new client, how big are you guys? The client would ask. And he'd always turn to me and be like, Patrick, how many people are we now? I'm trying to think through the phone list. And I'm thinking, I can see the phone list in my head. It's got 35 names on it. But and it was trying to figure out, what number are you looking for me to say? So, and I always love, if you're in a small agency and you don't off the top of your head know how big you are. It strikes me as it's one of the funniest. Like, how many guys are you? How many folks do you have in that office? Oh gosh, let's see. Now we're well, I don't know recently. I think we're 7. It's always a number where you're like, really? You don't know that off the top of your head? But it's just nobody wants to. They're all trying to figure out how small is acceptable enough.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think in today's world, it's kind of flipped. Now people want small, like less is more. So it's like I don't want to. I don't want to have to pay for a big team. Give me a small, nimble team that can do the work. So it's interesting now how it is. The business has shifted.
So the guys at McCann who are like, I don't know. Globally, we're probably 200, 300 people, maybe more than that. No, that is funny. Like it is the doors that are opening now for 50-person and less and fewer agencies. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. I think there definitely is more looking more toward that than toward kind of the bigger global footprints.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts for people doing new business that you would share with them based upon these experiences?
Obviously, don't say you're more than 3 times your size and then have them show up, or get move into a smaller loft if you're only 35 people. That's choice number 1. No, I do think there is I guess if I've learned anything over the years, it's clients are attracted to authentic stories, and they can kind of sniff out when you're not telling them the truth or you're shading something just a little too much. I think they're like, somehow we agency people think we can kind of pull the wool over on clients' eyes by, oh my God, we we must have left 15 campaigns back at the agency. Well, clients know, like, no, you didn't. These are probably the only 3 you had, and maybe you left 1 back at the agency. But I think we fall into these, the trap is to try to figure out, we fall into the trap of what do they want to hear, and or how do we want to project ourselves, versus just being brutally honest about it and kind of proud of it. Yeah. And it's hard to do when you really think, especially if you're smaller. But like you said, I think the tables have turned on that now, and technology has made it so that you don't need to be more than 50 or 60 people and do great work.
It's true. And I think being authentic too, because that's if you're in it for the long run, mm-hmm. then authenticity is going to win out versus some short-term spin on something. It's going to catch up with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. On that note, Patrick Collins, thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
being on Not Suitable for Work.
Thank you.
Patrick's story resonates. Companies will often overstate their capabilities, thinking that it's just a little white lie, and they'll be able to scale up as soon as they win the business, so the client will never know the difference. The problem is, most people can sniff out when someone is being disingenuous. While a prospective client may not be able to put their finger on exactly what's wrong, they can sense when something is amiss. This is when gut instinct and the intangible of making a business decision kick in. I wonder if the agency would have been able to convert either of those new business opportunities had the executives been upfront about their New York office. And finally, as Patrick stated, this amount of tomfoolery always wears on the staff and erodes their belief in the company and its leaders. I want to thank you for listening to Not Suitable for Work. If you haven't, take a quick second to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. If you have a question you want answered on a future episode, hit me up on Twitter at Peter C. Diamond. Not Suitable for Work is produced by Matt Cunningham at Truthful Enthusiasm. Get your story online with truthfulenthusiasm.com. Until next time.